A coin toss before the event determined that Mr. Litchfield will open the debate. Mr. Litchfield, your opening statement, please.
Well, good evening. Is this on? Well, anyway, I'll just talk loudly. Good evening, everyone. I want to thank the local Democratic committees, the University of Mary Washington Young Democrats. I look forward to a spirited debate this evening. My name is Ben Litchfield. I'm the former chairman of the Stafford County Democratic Committee. Are we still having noise problems? Oh! Okay. Is that better? Thank you. Sorry, everybody. Technical problems.
It's a political debate, not a technical.
Right. Okay. All right, let's start again. So, good evening, everybody. My name is Ben Litchfield. I'd like to start off by thanking the local Democratic committees, the University of Mary Washington Young Democrats for putting on an amazing debate this evening. I'm the former chairman of the Stafford County Democratic Committee, a position I held for 4 years. In that time, we elected good Democrats, including President Joe Biden, Senators Mark Warner, Senator Tim Kaine, and Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger. When I started in Stafford County, we had 7 Republicans on the Board of Supervisors, and now we have 3. So I think it's safe to say I know a little bit about how to win elections in this area. I'm a former consumer protection attorney. I practice in Washington, D.C. I got my start at the National Credit Union Administration, writing rules and regulations, cracking down on payday lending, providing opportunities for families to escape poverty, and expand credit union membership and access. I've advised Congress on some of the most technical pieces of banking legislation in recent history, and went to work in the Obama administration cleaning up after the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. I served, luckily enough, at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, where I was responsible for supervising the agency's mortgage, student loan, credit card, and automobile finance markets. During my time at the CFPB, I held predatory lenders accountable for preying upon our disabled veterans. I went after payday lenders that abused our teachers, and I held vehicle title companies responsible for literally repossessing cars as single parents were putting their children in them to go to work. I'm running because as much as we've done great work in Washington, Richmond does not work for working people. Tonight on these very streets, we have neighbors who will go to sleep without a roof over their head. In houses just yards away, there are families who are worried about when they're going to get their unemployment checks that have been denied and delayed for months, if not years. A lack of social service investment in this Commonwealth has exacerbated the hurt and the pain that countless families are experiencing today. I'm running to clean Richmond up, to use my experience as a federal regulator taking on Wall Street on behalf of the American people to make sure that we have an economy here in the Commonwealth that works for each and every one of you. That includes a historic investment in affordable childcare, combating climate change, supporting our small businesses, defending reproductive freedom from Glenn Youngkin and everyone who wants to interfere with your private medical decisions, and taking on our transportation needs. I look forward to a spirited debate. I'm very excited. Let's get to work.
Thank you. Mr. Griffin, your opening statement, please.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Joel Griffin. I wanted to thank you all for giving me the opportunity to participate in this Democratic Forum. I'm honored to be here, and it's good to see many familiar faces, and for those of you that I don't know, look forward to meeting you very soon. Me being here and simply running for Senate is an unlikely journey. I was raised in rural North Carolina to a working class family, a father who had an 8th grade education but managed to work what seems like 8 days a week, to a mom who had odd jobs. When the mills were closed in the 80s, she had to do the best that she could. Other than sports, I spent much of my free time in the public library, the only place I could escape from the harsh realities of my upbringing, and this set the foundation for the rest of my life. After leaving home at 14, I jumped from couch to couch, relying on friends, neighbors, coaches, and teachers to help me navigate high school. After graduating, I volunteered for the Marine Corps Infantry to serve our country. I left the Marines after 8 years and using the GI Bill, I was the first generation of my family to attend college. I settled in this area in 1999 as a government contractor and later founded my own business. Today, my company, Griffin, is a firm that focuses on funding and supporting small businesses, specifically veteran-owned companies here in the area. I'm the proud owner of several small businesses in Fredericksburg, employing over 100 people. In addition to my business experience, I've served in a variety of community roles across the region, focusing on job training, education, and economic development. While I'm proud of the work I've done for the community, my heart remains with my family, who I'm happy to say is here with us this evening. Jennifer and I lost our oldest daughter, Gwyneth, when she was just 13 years old. She went to cardiac arrest at school, and the staff had not been trained on how to perform CPR. We miss Gwyneth every single day, but my wife and I have attempted to turn our grief into action here in Virginia. In 2013, we worked with the General Assembly to pass what is now Gwyneth's Law, which requires every teacher to be CPR trained, every high school student before they graduate to be trained, and a defibrillator in every school. Later, in 2015, we started Gwyneth's Gift, which carries the mission into the community. We've trained over 18,000 individuals in our region, and this has resulted in 10 lives being saved. As someone who has been involved in our community, I know that nominating the right candidate in the primary is critically important. Women's rights are literally being torn away from them every single day, and they're burning books right here in our region. Virginia's 27th Senate District is the most critical seat in holding the line on the Democratic majority in the state Senate. Thank you to the Fredericksburg Democrats for hosting us. It's an honor to be with you this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Griffin. Mr. Litchfield, the first question is to you. In April, the Reason Foundation ranked Virginia first in the nation for highway performance and cost effectiveness. That news is very much welcome, but it masks the other findings in the report. We are in the bottom 50% of states for maintenance disbursements to repair roads, for our rural fatality rate, and for our quote-unquote other fatality rate. What would you do as a state senator to increase funding for building and maintaining the overstressed local roads in our community, in particular Routes 3, Route 17, and Route 610, and begin to decrease our fatality rates?
Sure. Well, I would start by challenging the premise that we have fantastic transportation system. I just remember the Washington Post reporting that our roads cost consumers billions of dollars. So I would start there. But I think we need to get serious about transportation. Everybody knows that we have some of the worst roads in Virginia. I moved from Fairfax to escape traffic, and it followed me down here. I'd like to see the establishment of a regional transportation authority here. Most funding for road improvement is done through a program called Smart Scale, and having a regional transportation authority would make us more competitive for Smart Scale funding. And so we need it. We need it now, and we need to make sure that the General Assembly passes it once and for all. But I think that we need to also expand upon that. We need to talk about how people get to and from work. Putting more cars on the road, expanding roads is not the solution to our transportation woes. We need high-frequency transit, the way that they have in Northern Virginia. Fairfax has the Q bus, which takes students from George Mason University to the Vienna Metro. We could have a Q bus. Alexandria has the Dash. There's the Fairfax Connector. There are plenty of options. I think that we need to create more funding for FXBG Go so that we can have electric buses with dedicated routes that operate more often. Obviously, we need to work with CSX to complete the Long Bridge project so that we have more transportation going up and down the Northeast Corridor, dedicated passenger rail, including Amtrak and VRE service. And we need to really talk about creating incentives for small businesses to allow telework so that folks don't have to get on the road to begin with, excuse me. And so I think that there are a lot of approaches that we can do to solve our transportation woes. I definitely don't think that widening our roads and putting more cars on them is the solution, though.
Thank you. Mr. Griffin.
So Ben and I agree on quite a bit on this issue. Continuing to put good money after bad is not a good investment. We can't widen the roads fast enough, and we can't certainly build the roads fast enough. So we need to look at alternatives. Some of the things that we've already done in Stafford County, when I was the chairman of Stafford Economic Development Authority, is we invested heavily in broadband. Over 96% of residents in Stafford County now have access to high-speed internet. This allows them to educate themselves, this allows them to work from home, this allows them to have greater access to the outside world without ever having to get in their car. Secondly, we need to look at and agree with Ben, the Regional Transportation Authority. We need to allow localities to spend the money where they see fit, improving their roads that already exist, widening roads that don't have any shoulders for some of our young drivers, as well as extending roads that currently end in cul-de-sacs, and if we simply put them through, that would create a secondary road access for people to avoid some of the major highways like 17 and 3. The Long Bridge initiative is something that started a long time ago. We need to start planning for that now. The Long Bridge is dedicated passenger rail that affords people the opportunity to get to anywhere from New York to New Orleans on a regularly scheduled train line. That system allows people to get to and from work, to and from vacations, to and from the airports that they need without putting additional cars on the road. These are initiatives that all add up to us getting less cars on the road. It's not adding more lanes, it's figuring out ways for people to get off of the roads.
Okay, just a quick follow-up question. Much of our funding, of course, comes from the taxes that we pay on gasoline. With the impetus and the stress in Washington to increase the number of sales of electric vehicles, it's going to begin to stress that tax base. How do we meet some of these very good but very expensive needs with a decreasing tax base to pay for it?
So I'm a history buff. I look at 2023 the same way that people were struggling in 1923. There's a lot of similarities, whether it's a global pandemic, whether it's the histories at war, the world's at war, whether it's issues of inflation and economic depression. These are things that we must address. One of the things that they did back then that I would love to see happen in Richmond is to be bold. We need to invest in the infrastructure for clean energy vehicles. Right now, clean energy vehicles, there's not enough research being done for them to extend the battery life. There's also not enough access for people to be able to use them on any real permanent basis. So we need to invest in the infrastructure for more vehicles to be on the highway.
So one approach that the General Assembly has tried to address this issue is to put a tax on electric vehicles, which I think is nonsense because it punishes people who are trying to do the right thing. I also think that the gas tax, to be quite honest, is regressive in that it punishes the people who can afford to pay it the least through higher gas prices. And so I would like to work across the aisle with Republicans and Democrats to find an alternative funding source to the gas tax. I think that we need to, as we transition to a clean economy, we need to look at new revenue sources. There are certainly things we can do, higher taxes on carbon emissions, higher taxes on energy companies, but there are ways to fund this without punishing commuters.
Mr. Griffin, the second question is to you. How do you plan to support economic development in Virginia while also protecting the rights of workers?
As a member of the Stafford Economic Development Authority for years, I have worked very hard to ensure that labor is something that is afforded the opportunity to have jobs. We talk about wage garnishment, wage theft, we talk about a number of issues regarding union work, but one of the things that we don't talk about is creating jobs for them, creating opportunities. Our region is one of the fastest growing here in the Commonwealth for the past 30 years. I want to see us continue to do well. Broadband has allowed greater access and flexibility, but it also creates a higher demand. So we need data centers here in our region. Those jobs can all be strong labor jobs. The economic development for our region continues to grow and expand. In the past 4 years, the Economic Development Authority for Stafford has generated over $28 million in new tax revenue for Stafford County. That's not growth, that's new revenue, $28 million. So I do believe in bringing together employees and employers, businesses and labor, so that we can collaborate, we can create good opportunities, good paying jobs, and continue to grow our economy.
And I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Absolutely. So how do you plan to support economic development while also supporting the, protecting the rights of workers?
Sure. So I think that far too often we see labor and management as in conflict with one another, but what we've been seeing in Rust Belt states in particular is labor and management working together to support one another. Labor helping to fund workforce training, labor coming together to provide better workplace safety, to advise management on different policies and procedures that they could adopt to make their workplace more efficient. And so I don't necessarily see labor and management in opposition so much. What I think that we need to do regionally to support economic growth and to support workers in general is to help our small businesses. We're really great at bringing small business here to our region, but we're not very good at keeping them here. And I think everybody knows what I'm talking about. All of the empty storefronts that we see in Spotsylvania, on 17, in Fredericksburg City, those are hopes and dreams that have collapsed. Now, I am proud to serve on the Economic Vitality Committee for Fredericksburg Main Street, where we are solving these problems head on. I'm working with a group of businesses to set up a healthcare co-op to provide health insurance for those business owners and their employees. And so you can see right there, there's no conflict between labor and management. They're entirely in sync with one another. I think that we need to do more in the General Assembly to support those efforts. We also need to push for more employee ownership so that small business owners who start businesses and want to retire can actually sell them to their employees. I don't necessarily see, again, I don't see labor and management in conflict. I think economic development can be fostered by just supporting the small businesses who are doing the work, finding ways to allow them to innovate, helping them reduce costs, and most of that will transfer onto their workers. I think that right now, we're in a very unique spot where workers have tremendous market power and can bargain for better labor conditions.
Thank you. And I'd like to follow that up first with you, Mr. Griffin. You know, corporate tax cuts and millions to develop business-ready sites are big issues in the current budget cycle. How would you handle these issues during a budget session?
The lack of available sites, and I don't just mean property, but sites where people can build their businesses, has completely limited what we can do here in the area. There needs to be greater collaboration between developers, businesses, and local elected officials in order to prepare some of these sites. So for example, Stafford County has over 60 pieces of property that, in collaboration with the EDA, we've been able to generate additional revenue by utilizing some of those properties, fostering new businesses, creating new businesses, encouraging new small businesses to enter those locations. And because of that, we were able to open new businesses and generate tax revenue. We don't have enough sites, and I think it's up to the legislation to work with the developers and the local elected officials to identify sites and direct where the economic growth is going to go.
Sorry, could you repeat the question one more time?
Sure. So along with business-ready sites, corporate tax cuts are big issues in this year's budget. How would you handle those issues during a budget session?
Sure. So fundamentally, I believe that corporations should be paying their fair share for the great goods and services that they receive in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Far too often, our policy has been to cut corporate taxes while short-selling the American worker, the Virginian worker, and the Virginian taxpayer. And so during a budget session, I would look with a cold eye towards any corporate tax breaks. I think that working families have been punished by the pandemic, and they should be our priority. Giving them immediate relief is my top priority in any budget session. Corporations can pay their fair share of taxes for the first time in a long time in this country.
Thank you.
Ben, you'll have the response to this one to begin. There have been an array of legislative issues affecting students and teachers in K-12 schools in Senate District 27, as well as nationwide. These trends may be difficult to counteract, as both the Virginia legislature and some local school boards have attacked teachers and students, further aggravating the teacher shortage crisis that we face. How would you offer support to students and teachers more directly at the school level in terms of proper education, mental health, and student sexuality topics?
I suppose it's me. Sorry about that. Well, you know, I've been involved in the fights that are going on in our schools for quite some time. One of the first things that I did as chairman of the Stafford County Democratic Committee was to work with a broad coalition of parents, students, and educators to pass an anti-discrimination policy protecting LGBTQ students and staff from discrimination through a Republican-leaning school board. And so I've been laser focused on the schools. I've also been particularly concerned about what's going on in Spotsylvania with the book banning and the book burning. And I've been working closely with some of the school board members there to make sure that we have some common sense and some normalcy there. I think with respect to supporting our students, one of the things that I could do as a legislator is obviously first and foremost use the moral authority of my office to let those students know that I'm an ally and that I support them. To oppose bills like those pushed by Delegate Tara Durant that would require teachers to out trans students to their parents, putting their lives at risk, and to quell the culture wars that Glenn Youngkin and others are fighting, trying to revise and whitewash our history. So I think that those are some of the many things that we can do in our schools. With respect to mental health, I do want to touch on this just since you raised it. We have a shortage of school psychologists and social workers in our public schools. It is creating a massive problem, not just with fighting, but you're seeing behavioral issues. I mean, just this past week, a student brought a loaded weapon to one of the Spotsylvania middle schools that adjoins the elementary school where my nephew was playing during field day. And so I think that there's a lot we can do, obviously using the moral authority of the office, fighting some of these extreme bills, and obviously providing more funding for mental health training and for mental health professionals in our schools.
Just wanted to quickly touch on the previous question. There is one distinction I want to make between myself and Ben. I believe that small businesses are paying their fair share of taxes already. Small businesses are the backbone of our community, and I just want to make sure that when we talk about corporations not paying their fair share of taxes, that we make some distinctions, because I know full well that small businesses are paying their way. I would also say, as regard education, I've been working on safety in our schools before safety in our schools was a conversation. Public safety in our schools is not just about school shootings. It's about creating an opportunity for everyone to feel safe, everyone to have equality in their classroom, everyone to feel heard, for people to have the opportunity to read the books that they want to read. And I do agree with Ben that the critical race theory, the breakdown in our schools where parents are trying to create division in our school system, that's something that we need to head on. We need to correctly and quickly identify what these issues are, and we need to address them, because frankly, school safety is an issue because of guns, but it's also because of issues like critical race theory and being transgender. I just don't feel that people are understanding what these teachers are going through. Being married to a school teacher, I see it. I've heard it. And 2 years ago, we're talking about teachers being heroes, and now we're throwing them under the bus and saying they're the scourge of our society. I don't know how we got to here, but I do know that as a senator, we need to head it on, and we need to address it through legislation.
Well, I just want to be very clear. I don't think anybody's talking about increasing taxes for small businesses, but what I was talking about was ensuring that the tax boondoggle that we almost got into with a Quiet Town Center doesn't happen, that we don't give a lot of gimmies to the Washington Commanders, and that we don't get into the problem that we have in Arlington right now, where we've promised a bunch of incentives to Amazon, and Amazon has failed to deliver any of the benefits. We have no problem cutting taxes and giving tax breaks to large corporations to come to Virginia, but when it comes time to give money to the Virginian worker, it seems like there's none left in the pot. And I just wanted to be very clear about that.
Thank you. I have a quick follow-up to this question. So in terms of education, how would you work to make educators have a more influential role in school decisions rather than those who seem to be having a larger role right now?
Well, I think that one of the things that we can do first and foremost is to recognize teachers' unions and allow them to bargain collectively on behalf of our teachers. Right now, we have a law where localities have to agree to collective bargaining by passing an ordinance. I think that we should do away with that, and if a majority of teachers in a school district want to organize and form a union, maybe they have one already, and I know that many of them do, then we should recognize those unions and allow them to bargain collectively with our school systems. As far as giving teachers a greater role in the decision-making in their classroom, I think that one of the biggest things we can do is push back against this legislation, which goes into the weeds of curriculum, which tries to change our SOLs, which allows for onerous examination of instruction material and interferes with the student-teacher relationship to an excessive degree that overburdens and overpenalizes our educators.
I get frustrated when I talk about schools because there's this fallacy that parents don't have a voice. And I've been in the classrooms. I've seen my wife sit on her time for hours waiting for parents to show up for parent-teacher conferences, and no one shows up. When you have a parent who wants to have a say in what their child learns, I'm all for that. That's their child. They should have that prerogative to be able to walk in and say, I don't want my student watching that video or reading that book. But you don't have the right to walk in and ban an entire series of books because you don't agree with their political agenda or their cultural ideology. So I would say that we need to honor the teachers and their labor. We need to honor the education that they put in to become a professional, and we need to start treating them like the professionals that they are versus the daycare workers that some in our society want to make them.
Mr. Griffin, this question's to you. Virginia's recidivism rate is regularly celebrated as one of the lowest in the nation, but these numbers are not correct. An analysis by Jeff Schwainer of Newsleader suggests recidivism isn't the 23% that's often quoted, but it's closer to 67%. Under Governor Youngkin, Virginia is reducing prisoner releases and making it harder for those who are released to resume a productive role in society. What particular policies would you pursue to help those who have served their time make an easier and quicker transition back to a productive place in our society?
First, I would advocate that we repeal this so-called committee that the governor has put in place to evaluate individuals and their voting rights. There's been nothing demonstrated that there's been any sort of rubric or measurement or KPIs to determine whether or not these people would qualify under a certain category. So in the absence of that, we need to repeal it. We need to go back to restoring voters' rights for nonviolent offenders. Secondly, if we want to talk about recidivism, reincarceration, there's a direct correlation between someone having a job and them going back to prison. If they can get a job, if they can earn an income where they don't have to be out in the streets, where they don't have to struggle making ends meet, where they can have some dignity and earning a job, then the likelihood of them returning to prison diminishes. So I would say that our continued growth in our region, continued opportunities for jobs, for people to be able to get employment, I think that's a direct correlation to reducing the number of people who are returning to prison.
So I approach this issue from a very personal perspective. My father is a returning citizen, having served a few years in prison for a drug sentence. I can tell you the biggest challenge that my father had when finding a job was that he was a convicted felon. And on job applications from a gas station all the way up to sweeping floors in a public elementary school, they asked him, "Are you a felon?" And every time they said, "Thanks, but no thanks." I think that in Virginia we need to study what's called banning the box, prohibiting employers in select places of employment from asking about criminal history, except where it's relevant, except in cases of violent crimes or murders and things of that nature. Because I agree, finding a job is one of the most important things. I also think that we need to talk about housing, because one of the biggest challenges that my father's currently having is maintaining safe, affordable housing. I also think that we need to provide more investment in halfway programs, more investment in mental health, because for a lot of these returning citizens, they were receiving a lot of mental health treatment in jails, and they're not getting it on the outside. They can't find a psychiatrist to continue treatment. They can't find a doctor to continue with drug treatments. So what we're seeing is once you get released, it's you're off, you're on your own devices, and I don't think that that's necessarily compassionate. I think it does increase recidivism rates. Many feel very hopeless. Without housing, without a job, without the means to provide for themselves, they're at risk of reoffending. I also think that we need to support programs like what Juanita Shanks from Failsafe ERA is doing. A lot of these job training programs, workforce development programs. There's a lot that we can do here to protect our returning citizens and to reduce recidivism rates. I also think we need to work on post-release reform, because there are a lot of traps and tricks that you can trip over that bring you right back to jail, a simple probation violation. Thanks, Matt.
So a quick follow-up question to this, directed to both of you. The argument from the conservative side of the aisle is going to be that the proposals that each of you have talked about, this makes Democrats, quote unquote, soft on crime. How do we break down, or how would you begin to break what I personally would argue is a faulty argument? You can both be strong on crime and supportive of people who have served their time. How do we begin to change that conversation? Mr. Griffin.
Sure. Well, I probably would throw back in their face that their argument is that if we had more guns, we'd have less crime. So I'm not really sure that's working out for them too well. Look, the reality is that as a Democrat, I've been painted into a box where I'm a business owner, I'm a veteran. How can you be a Democrat if you're those things? I think we need to really address the fact that Republicans don't own anything. They don't own strong businesses and the strong military, and they also don't own the idea that they're strong on crime. I don't think treating a citizen equally after they've served their term, giving them equality under the law after they've paid their dues, is anything less than humane.
I think the way that I would address this is just point out that tough on crime is not smart on crime, and that we should be smart on crime. We waste billions of dollars incarcerating individuals in this country. The untold economic loss, not only to the economy, but to their individual families, is really harrowing. And I think that confronting Republicans with the fact that we are not making our communities safer, we are not running the government in an efficient manner, we are not being good stewards of the public fisc. Instead, what we're doing is putting a lot of folks in jail without a lot of benefit. That's not being tough on crime, that's being stupid on crime. And we can do better.
Okay, so my question will go off to Ben, right, Ben? And it's about mental health, which you mentioned a couple times. And my question is, while the government has pushed for mental health resources, many people, especially post-COVID, are still struggling with their mental health. What are your priorities in the mental health sphere?
Sure. So I think that, first of all, I want to acknowledge that mental health is a broad field with quite a few different discrete issues. But one of the things that I really want to point out is that we do not have a sufficient number of inpatient beds for children right now, and that should be our first and foremost priority. Our children are experiencing a historic mental health crisis as a result of the pandemic and the lockdowns and all of the issues that they've been going through. You see it in fights in school, you see it on social media, and so my first and foremost priority would be working with Senator Creed Deeds to provide greater funding for inpatient treatment for children. I also think we need to recognize that we have a woefully inadequate number of clinicians, social workers, and psychologists, and so creating incentives for people to enter those fields and to find jobs in those fields has to be paramount as well. My mother just finished her social work degree, her master's of social work. I can tell you that it was incredibly expensive, and she certainly wasn't going to pay it off with some of the salaries that were being offered. And so we need to find ways to both lower the cost of social worker education, create grants and other programs for these high-need areas, but also to look into supporting businesses and our public governments so that they can give more money to social workers. We need more boots on the ground to address the mental health crisis. I also, just from a moral and social perspective, I think we need to destigmatize seeking mental health care. Millennials and Gen Z have done a very good job of that, but I remember growing up there was a stigma to it. People need to understand that it is okay to seek help. It is okay to ask someone to help you to put on the mask first, or to put on the mask, because it is fundamentally about making sure that you're okay and that you can move forward. And so those are my priorities.
Well, this is the benefit of having two amazing Democrats on the stage. We actually 100% agree on that issue. Mental health is a real crisis. It's something that affects all of our society. Our youth, certainly, there is absolutely agreement on there's a lack of school counselors. We've talked to school counselors. They're seeing 300 to 400 students. That's not counseling, that's managing at best. And so we need to identify opportunities for additional school counselors. I also agree that the state can create legislation that would allow people who are serving in some of these communities in these low-paying jobs that we all know teachers are, that these counselors can step into some of these roles and we can offer assistance, whether it's foregoing some of their student debt or aiding them with grants in order for them to pay for some of those costs. We need more beds in Snowden. Snowden is a local facility that has recently expanded but continues to expand, and the homeless population here in our area has continued to grow. Some of that is coming from Stafford, some of that is coming from Spotsylvania, but we must absolutely address it here as a region, and we need to encourage all of our local officials to apply for state funding and expand those facilities as rapidly as possible. The last thing I'll say is that PTSD is a real issue for our returning veterans. As a veteran, I have encountered several of my friends who have had to seek help outside of the VA process because the VA does not move fast enough. While we have a VA hospital coming here, PTSD in our veterans, we're losing veterans to suicide every single day, and it's something that we must address. They have served their country, and we must do something to serve them.
Thank you. And my follow-up is based off of your reference of telework and schooling from home in the transportation question that we offered. And my question is, how are you prepared to balance incentivizing working and schooling from home with mental health care? Because a lot of people will, like as we saw during the pandemic, a lot of people felt really isolated. Do you think that's a concern still, or how would you help alleviate those struggles?
Who goes first?
That would be Ben.
Okay. So it is a concern. I can tell you that I work remotely right now. I don't see very many people during the workday. And so I do think it is a concern that, as we increase telework and as we increase remote learning opportunities, that we also have a balance so that folks can get some time and spend some time with each other. I think that part of that is just cultural. We need to encourage employers to tell their workers, like my office is really great. They say, look, you can have mental health days. You can take you need to check out for a few hours. We need to do more things like that, encourage employers to do things like that. We also need to use again, this moral suasion, the moral authority of our office to destigmatize seeking mental health care, to encourage people to go out into a park, go for a walk, to enjoy the sunshine, to spend time with friends. I don't think that there's much that we can do legislatively, but there's definitely a lot that we can do morally, just by standing up and talking about it.
So for me, I think there is a balance between being able to utilize broadband and get your education at home, but we also need to take advantage of this wonderful community that we have. There's so many amenities and parks, opportunities for everyone to get out, participate in free programs. We have, as a region, in my opinion, some of the best educational opportunities for students. Education is not about memorization. And I think we've fallen, because of SOLs, we've fallen into that trap where memorize, take a test, forget, and move on. I'd love to see students have the opportunity to where they can benefit. If they're talking about the American Civil War, walk out your front door. If you're talking about the American Revolution, go to some of the museums that we have here. So there's opportunity for us to incorporate education within our community, and we can take advantage of all of the amenities that we have here.
All right, and with this last question, I will direct it to Mr. Griffin. The Senate defeated 3 bills seeking to restrict access to abortion in the last session. There are certainly more coming with an expanded scope. How are you going to fight to protect access to not just abortion, but contraceptives at the state level?
I will unequivocally say that an individual's decision with their health care provider is between them and their health care provider. It is nothing to do with a politician. A woman's right to choose is greater than just simply something that we need to talk about after the Dobbs decision. We need to make sure that equality under the law becomes what we're enshrining in our Constitution. We can do that by protecting a woman's right to choose, but also as a region, as a state, leading the South and making sure that it's understood that we are not going to legislate half of our population differently because they have a different biology. We're also not going to start legislating people based on their race, religion, gender, sexual ideology. It's a slippery slope, folks. We've got to make sure that a woman's right to choose is enshrined in the Constitution, and we make it very clear by having a strong blue Senate that we hold the line. Moreover, I've got 2 daughters, and my youngest is of the age where she may be starting to make some of those decisions. I could not look at her at night if I allowed the legislator body to come forward and say, this is what you will or will not do with your body. I can't abide by that. I won't abide by that. So I can assure you, as the next senator, that I will be standing up to protect all of the women in our community.
Mr. Litchfield.
Thank you. I think it's important to recognize the stakes. Virginia is the last state in the South to allow for reproductive health care. And we hear horror stories from across the nation about children being forced to travel across state lines to obtain an abortion after instances of rape or incest. We hear about women being required to carry terminally ill fetuses to term. These laws are compounding medical trauma and risking the lives of women. In Florida, where gender-affirming care has been made illegal, what we're seeing is insurance companies using that as a pretext to ban hormonal birth control and IUDs. So the stakes are real. Michigan recently passed a constitutional amendment guaranteeing the fundamental right to reproductive freedom, and Virginia should follow. I have said it since day one of this race, and I will say it until the last, that I will guarantee the right to choose in the Virginia Constitution by codifying Roe and Griswold. But protecting reproductive freedom also means that we need to address disparate outcomes among lower-income pregnant people, and we need to address the rising maternal mortality rate, particularly in Black and brown communities. We need to go bold and be bold and unafraid in tackling reproductive health care. I concur with my colleague that the government has no place in the doctor's office, and as the next state senator from Fredericksburg, I'll keep Glenn Youngkin out of the doctor's office for all of you.
All right, and following that up, Mr. Griffin, this region is a
I
difficult...
thought she said that was the last question.
Oh, I know. This region is a difficult one for women looking to access abortions. Abortion providers are an hour away and require transportation. Do you have plans to encourage feasible access?
I'm not sure what a legislative body would have, what their role would be in encouraging those kinds of services. But I think ensuring that, as Ben and I have both said very loudly, that if we protect those rights, if we protect the access, if we protect both a man and a woman's right to be able to have planned pregnancies, Planned Parenthood, preventative care, all of those options and their local healthcare providers, I strongly encourage that. I'm not sure what a legislative body could do in terms of having greater access.
So one of the things that I think we can do is look at a market-based solution. If we make health care affordable, particularly prenatal care and post-operative care, affordable for individuals, and we also make abortion services affordable for those who want it, then I think that there will be clinics that come to this area to provide them. I think one of the things that we're seeing is that there's a huge affordability problem. Folks do not, I've seen this with countless families, that folks who are on public health care often do not get the same kind of treatment that folks with Cadillac plans do. And so I think making sure that abortion access and abortion services are covered by health insurance, making sure that that those services are being provided, and that there are incentives for providers to come to the region is paramount. I think that that's probably the limit of what we can do without interfering in private business.
Thank you.
Thank you for your answers tonight. This brings us to our closing statements. Mr. Griffin, the pleasure is yours, sir.
Thank you.
3 months ago, I got into this race. I did it because I believed I could win, and I wanted to defend our freedoms. I did it in the Marine Corps, and I intend to do it again as the next state senator. I'm thankful for the people that have supported me: Stafford Supervisor Dr. Pam Young, Delegate Josh Cole, former Governor Ralph Northam, and former candidate Luke Wright, who's also joined our campaign. We all know how much is at stake this fall. The elections in the House and the Senate will determine the fate of Virginia for the next decade. As the next state senator for District 27, I will do everything in my power to enshrine a woman's right to choose in the Virginia Constitution, fund our public schools, and promote labor and a strong economy. But make no mistake, I am the candidate that can win in November. I am the candidate that can take on Tara Durant, Matt Strickland. Irregardless of who wins in their primary, I am the person that can beat them. I can go head-to-head with them, and I can win in November, and I can ensure that we take this seat, we make a strong blue Senate, and we take back the governor's office in the next few years. So thank you very much. Thank you, Ben.
Well, I'd like to start off by thanking the local committees for this amazing debate. I'd like to thank our moderators for keeping us honest, for our timekeeper. You know, this election is about what kind of community we want to be. We have the opportunity to, for the first time, speak with one voice. And the question is, what do we want? Who do we want that voice to be? Do we want to shrink back in fear and say that we really can't win unless we appeal to, folks who want to tear down our schools and burn our books? Or are we going to be big and bold and say, we are Fredericksburg. We are the community that saw a need. We saw a field that was going to be sold for development, and we raised millions of dollars to preserve it for conservation for future generations. We saw our neighbors hungry, and we set up a grocery store owned by our neighbors. We raised hundreds of thousands of dollars in a run to end homelessness. That's who we are. That's who we should send to Richmond. That's the voice that we should speak. I am so proud of this campaign. I'm so proud of everything we've done. The college students that come out every weekend to knock doors, the 20,000 neighbors that we've had a chance to leaflet and canvass. And I'm proud to be endorsed by Delegates Candy King and Sam Rasool, the Democrats on the Stafford and Spotsylvania school boards, community leaders, many of whom are in this room, state and national organizations, including the Progressive Democrats of America, United Rural Democrats, Run for Something, the Eastern States Regional Council of Carpenters, the United Auto Workers, and many more. I'm running because I believe in each one of you. I believe you deserve an economy that works for you. I believe you deserve a climate that you can pass on to your children and your grandchildren, that future generations can play in the same parks that we play in today. I believe you deserve to get to work without sitting in traffic for 2 hours. And I believe that you have the right to make your medical decisions without a veto from a city councilor, without a veto from a delegate or a state senator or a governor. And that's why I'm running. I'm Ben Litchfield, and I'm asking for your vote on June 20th. Together, we will defeat the Republicans in November. Thank you.
The election this November for the new 27th District Senate seat will be very hotly contested. It will also be closely watched by the media, the governor's office, and local office holders. So it's very encouraging that tonight we have heard from two candidates who are both solid in their Democratic Party credentials, but they're also diverse in the approaches they take to some of the issues that we have discussed this evening. Please join me in a round of applause thanking Joel Griffin and Ben Litchfield for agreeing to participate this evening when other candidates, quite frankly, dodged debates. Thank you, gentlemen, for doing that.